Hi, I'm Katarina Rosnick, and welcome to the first episode of This Week in Biotech weekly video summaries. These will be quick recaps of the most important developments in biotech and pharma from the previous week. So I'll still keep publishing the regular This Week in Biotech edition every Friday morning, but then these videos will follow on Friday afternoons or Saturday mornings. And in these videos, I'll break down what happened, why the news matter, and what to watch next. But before I get into this week, I have a quick announcement. Biotech Blueprint now has its own podcast. We're on Spotify and Apple Podcasts. And in these longer episodes, I discuss interesting biotech developments and topics with industry experts and academics. And we have a very interesting lineup of podcasts planned. So be sure to check that out. So let's get right into the greatest news from May 2nd to May 10th, 2025. So last week, CRISPR Therapeutics made an important announcement from early phase 1 clinical trial of CTX310, which is its in vivo, or meaning in human, tested, gene editing candidate targeting a gene called ANGPTL3. So this gene, when it's knocked out in patients in their liver cells, reduces production of triglycerides and LDL, or also known as bad cholesterol, which can then be responsible for heart disease. In one high-dose patient, they saw an impressive 82% drop in triglycerides and 81% drop in LDL cholesterol. This was all from a single dose, and there were no serious safety issues reported. And this is very impressive because if these results hold up in subsequent studies, they're better than current standard of care like statins that lower cholesterol by about 25 to 50%, or injectable antibodies that currently lower LDL by about 60%. But it's important to be objective. The overall data comes from just 10 patients. And as I said, this standout, really impressive finding is from a single individual. Also, they tested lower doses. They had minimal effect, so it has to be the higher dose. And durability beyond 30 to 90 days remains unknown. And also, these are just surrogate endpoints. No outcomes are known yet. We don't know if CTX310 lowers the risk of heart attacks or strokes. So obviously we need to wait for subsequent clinical trials, but I think this is fairly impressive and exciting news. Our next story is about the FDA. So biotech stocks dropped sharply, you may have noticed, after the FDA named Vinay Prasad as the head of CBER. CBER is the FDA Biologics Division, and Mr. Prasad is a UCSF oncologist known for criticizing COVID-era policies. He replaced Peter Marks, who resigned under pressure from HHS Secretary RFK Jr. Now, as I said, the markets reacted very strongly to this news. The biotech ETF's XBI fell 6%, with vaccine makers like Moderna, Vaxcyte, even more, around 14%, BioNTech about 6% as well. What is CBER? So CBER is a regulatory body within the FDA. It's responsible for regulating a lot of biological products to ensure that they're safe, available, and effective for the patient. And these products can include vaccines, blood and blood components, human cells, tissues, gene therapies, and certain medical devices. So from what I read about Prasad, it seems that he wants more rigor, slower approvals, and stronger evidence. And that can directly affect CBER regulated spaces like gene therapies, vaccines, and cell therapies. So is this reaction justified? I think both yes and no. I think yes, because Vinay Prasad could make it harder for companies, especially smaller cap companies, to survive and perhaps get higher priced single patient or small population biologics approved on softer endpoints. But I also think it might be not justified fully because CBER is still part of the larger FDA, and so Prasad will ultimately answer to the FDA Commissioner, Martin Makary, who signaled actually openness to fast reviews in rare diseases, so the opposite rhetoric. So time will tell how this plays out. The next thing to watch is May 22nd, when the FDA Vaccine Advisory Committee meets to vote on the next season's COVID-19 formula. And so we will see how this rhetoric and different policies come into play. The next is NIH budget cuts. So the Trump administration is proposing a slash to NIH funding, and it's a significant slash from $48.5 billion to $27 billion, so almost a half. And it also will cut, or is proposing to cut, 27 institutes to just 5. That could have major implications for biotech startups that rely on NIH-backed partnerships, grants, and early-stage research pipelines. I wanted to know how much money the NIH spends, or how much money it's spent over time. And I was pretty surprised to find that the last time the NIH operated on this budget of $37 billion was in 2003. So the proposed 2026 budget would revert NIH funding to levels not seen since the early 2000s. And so I think these proposed cuts are concerning. They could definitely impact biomedical research and innovation in the United States. Next, we have Charles River. So Charles River is a company that is the biggest provider of lab animals in the world, and they announced a board shakeup and strategic review because the FDA keeps announcing support to alternatives to animal testing, especially organoids, organs on chips, which are exactly what they sound like, miniature organs on a USB stick, or AI-driven simulations. And so that's definitely a major threat to a company that is built around supplying lab animals. And I'll go much deeper into this on this topic in a future podcast episode that I have prepared, and also a deep dive article. So stay tuned. I think it's a very, very interesting topic. And lastly, despite volatility in biotech, we have two companies that held their ground. Vertex and Gilead, they reported their earnings, and Vertex slid slightly on weak earnings and slower than expected uptake of its new non-opioid painkiller, but it's still up 8% year to date, and Gilead is even more up. And they also added another $11 billion to its US investment plans, bringing its total commitment to over $30 billion through 2030, which is a move that may buffer the company against upcoming pharma tariffs. And so these two companies seem to be the strongholds in the quite volatile sector. And lastly, I just wanted to mention two more noteworthy stories. You can read more about these in our latest edition of This Week in Biotech, published last Friday on Substack. So one is the European Medicines Agency, or EMA, suspended Valneva's chikungunya vaccine in adults 65 plus after serious adverse events. There are 17 serious adverse events and 2 deaths. And the US FDA followed 2 days later with the suspension of the vaccine. The trial in other age groups is still ongoing, but this is definitely a setback for the company. And lastly, Teva and Alvotech received FDA approval this past week for Solarsdi, which is a biosimilar of Johnson & Johnson's Stelara, with full interchangeability across all approved indications, including plaque psoriasis, psoriatic arthritis, Crohn's disease, ulcerative colitis in both adults and children. So big milestone for the companies. So this is all for this week. This was our first weekly video update for May 2nd through 10, 2025. Thanks so much for listening. I hope you subscribe to our newsletter on Substack. possibly on LinkedIn, and that you follow our new podcast on Spotify or Apple Podcasts. And I'll be back next week with more updates.